It seemed like there was resistance to that movie. There was like Hollywood resistance. People didn't like that you were making it.
Imagine standing on a world where silence is so complete it feels like the universe itself has stopped breathing, where the sky above you is not blue, not gray, but a blackness so deep and so absolute that it feels less like a color and more like the edge of existence. Imagine looking down at your boots and seeing dust that has not been disturbed for billions of years, dust so fine it behaves almost like smoke, clinging to everything it touches. Now imagine being one of only 12 human beings in all of history who have ever stood in that place and felt that reality with their own 2 feet. Charles Duke is one of those 12, and after more than 50 years of relative silence, he is finally telling the world what that experience truly felt like, what he truly witnessed up there, and why the story history recorded barely scratches the surface of what actually happened. Most people who recognize the name Charles Duke associate it with a single moment. July 20th, 1969, the night Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and a nervous, emotion-filled voice from Mission Control stumbled over the word tranquility. That voice belonged to Duke. As the designated Capcom for Apollo 11, he was the sole individual authorized to communicate directly with Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin during humanity's most historic mission. When Armstrong confirmed the Eagle had landed, Duke was so overwhelmed that his words came out tangled and broken. Millions heard that voice. Almost nobody knew the face behind it. But Charles Duke was far more than a voice on a radio. Born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, Duke was a man of exceptional discipline and intelligence. He graduated as valedictorian from Admiral Farragut Academy, earned his degree from the U.S. Naval Academy, and later completed a Master of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics from MIT. He chose the Air Force over the Navy, eventually catching NASA's attention in 1966 when he was selected as part of the 5th astronaut group. From that point forward, his life belonged to the stars. His role during Apollo 11 made him famous in voice but invisible in person. Yet it also gave him something rare, a perspective on the moon program that almost no other human being shares. Duke did not just walk on the moon. He guided others there first. He heard the tension in Armstrong's breathing. He felt the weight of those 60 seconds of remaining fuel from 240,000 miles away. And then, 3 years later, he went himself. Apollo 16 launched on April 16, 1972. Duke was 36 years old, making him the youngest member of the crew. Commander John Young, a seasoned veteran of both the Gemini and Apollo programs, led the mission. Ken Mattingly, who had famously been pulled from Apollo 13 after Duke had unknowingly exposed him to German measles, served as command module pilot. The destination was the Descartes Highlands, a rugged and largely unexplored region of the lunar surface that scientists believed held ancient geological secrets. The mission nearly did not happen. After entering lunar orbit, an unexpected problem developed with the service module's backup engine control system. For 6 agonizing hours, Duke and Young sat in their lunar module waiting for engineers back on Earth to analyze the data and make a decision. The landing was delayed but eventually cleared to proceed. When Orion finally touched down, it settled just 270 meters from the intended target. For Duke, the moment the engines cut and silence returned was overwhelming in a way no simulation had ever prepared him for. When he stepped out onto the Descartes Highlands, Charles Duke became the 10th human being in history to walk on another world. That record, youngest person ever to set foot on the moon at 36 years old, still belongs to him today. But the historic significance of the moment was almost immediately overtaken by something far more immediate and far more difficult to describe. Duke has spent decades trying to explain to people what the moon actually looks like when you are standing on it. The photographs, he insists, fundamentally lie. Not through any manipulation or deception, but simply because cameras cannot capture what the human eye and mind experience in that environment. Every image flattens a reality that is defined entirely by its extremes. The first thing that hit him was the sky, or rather, the complete absence of anything resembling a sky. Above his helmet was not a pale horizon or a gradient of deepening blue. It was pure, unbroken, absolute black, a darkness so total and so permanent that it felt less like looking up and more like staring into something that had no bottom, no end, no boundary whatsoever. Duke described it as the kind of darkness that makes you feel physically small, not just metaphorically, but in your bones. It pressed down on the brilliant white landscape below it with a contrast so violent and so unnatural that his brain struggled to process the image as real. The lunar surface itself was nothing like the gentle gray photograph suggested. In person, without any atmosphere to soften or scatter the sunlight, every rock, every crater rim, every grain of compacted dust existed in a state of visual aggression. Shadows were not shadows in any earthly sense. They were walls of complete blackness, as sharp and defined as if someone had drawn them with a blade. The transition from sunlight to shade happened in the space of a single inch, with no gradation, no softening, no mercy. Duke compared it to a world where someone had removed every comfortable middle ground and left only the extremes. The temperature mirrored this brutal duality. In direct sunlight, the surface reached temperatures above 127 degrees Celsius. Step into a shadow, and the reading plunged to nearly negative 173 degrees. The suits protected the astronauts from the worst of it, but not entirely. Duke could feel the heat seeping through the material when standing in full sun. He could feel the cold creeping through his boots when he stepped into shade. There was, as he later put it, no comfortable place on the moon. Every inch of it reminded you that it was not built for human beings. One of the details Duke returns to repeatedly when describing his time on the surface is the silence. Not the absence of sound exactly, because inside the suit there was always the hum of machinery, the sound of his own breathing, the crackle of radio communications. But beyond the suit, beyond the thin shell of technology keeping him alive, the moon offered a silence that felt geological, ancient, absolute. Sound requires air to travel. The moon has none. Whatever happened out there, whatever Duke's boots did to the billion-year-old dust beneath them, the moon registered none of it. That dust itself deserves particular attention, because it was unlike anything Duke had encountered in any training exercise. Lunar dust is not like beach sand or desert powder. It is the product of billions of years of micrometeorite bombardment, cosmic radiation, and solar wind, ground down to particles with edges still sharp at microscopic levels because there is no weather, no water, no erosion to round them off. It clung to Duke's suit with a persistence that seemed almost intentional. It covered every surface it touched, and when brought back into the pressurized environment of the lunar module, it released a smell that Duke described consistently across multiple interviews as something close to spent gunpowder. Metallic, sharp, faintly acrid. No one had predicted that. No simulation had replicated it. While Apollo 11 captured the imagination of the entire planet, Apollo 16 quietly achieved things that scientists still mine for data today. Duke and Young spent over 17 hours on the lunar surface across 3 separate moonwalks, covering more than 26 kilometers in the lunar roving vehicle. They collected nearly 96 kilograms of geological samples, among the most diverse and scientifically valuable ever retrieved from the moon. The crown jewel of their collection was a massive boulder later nicknamed Big Muley, after the geologist who spotted it on the live television feed. Weighing nearly 12 kilograms on Earth, it turned out to be a breccia formed by ancient meteorite impacts, approximately 3.97 billion years old. Laboratories around the world are still extracting new information from pieces of that rock today. But perhaps more significant than what they found was what they did not find. Scientists had sent Apollo 16 to the Descartes Highlands specifically expecting evidence of ancient volcanic activity. Duke and Young found no such thing. What they found instead were impact breccias, rocks shattered and reshaped by the same catastrophic bombardment that scarred the lunar surface during its earliest history. That discovery fundamentally rewrote scientific understanding of how the lunar highlands were formed. Apollo 16 also deployed the first astronomical telescope ever operated from the surface of another world. The far ultraviolet camera spectrograph, placed directly on the lunar soil in the shadow of the lunar module, captured wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation that Earth's atmosphere completely absorbs. For the first time in human history, the universe was observed without the filter of any atmosphere at all. Duke later called it a window into the cosmos that no ground-based observatory could ever match. History barely remembers it, Charles Duke is now 89 years old. He is one of only 4 surviving moonwalkers, alongside Buzz Aldrin, David Scott, and Harrison Schmitt. He feels the weight of that fact with increasing intensity as each year passes. The window for first-hand human testimony about what it means and what it feels like to walk on the moon is closing, and Duke has made it his personal mission to ensure that window stays open as long as possible. He speaks at schools, museums, and public events with a sense of urgency that has grown sharper with age. When he talks to young people about Apollo 16, he is not simply recounting history. He is making an argument for the future, insisting that the generation who witnessed the moon landings had a responsibility to hand something real and honest to the generations who will one day return there. He wants them to know that it was not clean or easy or poetic in the ways popular culture has always suggested. It was disorienting and physically demanding, and in many moments genuinely terrifying. And it was also the most extraordinary thing any human being has ever done. Duke left something personal on the moon before he climbed back into the lunar module for the last time. A sealed photograph of his family, placed on the surface and covered lightly with dust. It is still there today, faded, degraded by decades of radiation and temperature extremes, but still there. In some ways, it is the most honest monument to the entire Apollo program. Not a flag or a plaque, but a photograph of the people a man was doing it for, left behind in the dust of another world, in the silence that never ends. Charles Duke walked on the moon over 50 years ago. He has spent every year since trying to tell people what that actually means, what it actually looked like, felt like, and cost in ways that numbers and mission reports can never capture. At 89, he carries that testimony with a weight and a clarity that only time and perspective can produce. The moon was not a stage set. It was not a backdrop for heroic photographs. It was an alien world that humbled every human being who stood on it, reminded them of their smallness, and then somehow, impossibly, also reminded them of their greatness. Charles Duke was there, and as long as he is able, he will keep telling us exactly what that means.